So we're going to see the program 76 Years at Abrams. And this is a place that's really close to my heart as I grew up, teething, so to speak, in the hobby. A lot of time at Abrams, which is close by to our home. We lived in Norristown until 1951. And at that point, my parents would take me over to Bridgeport, the roundhouse that they had there. And it was a great situation because there was a street that overlooked the Bridgeport roundhouse, and you could watch the steam engines being turned and big coaling dock, etc. So on the main line, just east of what is Abrams, and a very, very busy place. So I really enjoyed that. And then as time went on, we spent more time at Abrams because the roundhouse was not in use anymore. They actually moved the servicing facilities out to Abrams in 1964. And so the place to go was Abrams, and it had great access. You could park right next to the tracks, and lots of action, as you'll see in the program tonight. The Reading Railroad operated the tracks and the yard at Abrams from, well, actually, from way back when it started until 1976. The program only covers the period 1947 to 1976. Following the inclusion of Reading into Conrail in 1976, Conrail operated the yard. You're looking east in both of those pictures, by the way, and of course, the big blue was the paint scheme we saw all those years. And then finally, with the split of Conrail between Norfolk Southern and CSX, Norfolk Southern gained control of the yard, and is still operating the yard today. Give you an idea where it is. The red star, lower right-hand side of the picture, is the location of Reading, excuse me, of Abrams in the Reading system. It's certainly on the far eastern end of the system and was a very busy place, as you'll see again in the pictures. My home, after we lived in Norristown, was very close by at a place called Bettswood. And Bettswood was 4 miles away from Abrams on the opposite side of the Schuylkill River. And Bettswood was opposite Valley Forge State Park in those days, National Park today. So that gives you a reference of where I was and how close I was to Abrams. Initially, my parents would take me, and then I got old enough to walk over, given permission to walk the 4 miles. And then, of course, grew up some more and had a bicycle, and that really cut the time down. And today, as after that time, accessed by automobile. Abrams was fascinating. As a kid, I first saw this when I was 5 years old. They had these huge, huge piles of anthracite coal. And what was interesting about that is you could see the crane type of covering that would lift the coal up onto the top of the pile. And the purpose of that was to maintain a constant flow of anthracite coal to either North Jersey and or Philadelphia. And coal, of course, was central to heating homes and operating businesses, and coal was king for all those years. And this was built in 1904 to make sure that if there was a strike or floods or whatever, the supply of coal would be uninterrupted. If you look at a map, a schematic map of the coal piles, the yard office and where we would sit to watch the trains is down here. And then the yard, of course, extended west. Schuylkill River was very close to the yard on this side, but these big storage circles, piles, were here. And this is an actual aerial view of that. And you can see down here those piles. And again, this is west of the yard office and the public access to watch the trains. Now, it was initially a coal storage facility. And by the way, this map does show you Bettswood, which is where I live, and the proximity of Abrams Yard. Abrams was in an area with lots of railroads. You had the Pennsylvania Railroad, Schuylkill Valley branch on this side of the river. And that was not a tremendously busy line, but it did serve industries up along the river, especially at Pottstown, Reading, and would play a part in the Pennsylvania Railroad getting access to the anthracite coal fields in northeastern Pennsylvania. The Trenton Cutoff was down here. And then you had the P&W trolley, Philadelphia and Western, which is Sector 100 route today. And there's the Valley Forge State Park down here. Port Kennedy, we'll see some pictures of that in a minute for a very good reason. Now, as the industries expanded, they also expanded operations out of the yard at Abrams. One of the lines that was served was the Chester Valley branch, which went west from Bridgeport to Downingtown. That's 21 miles. And that is shown down here in this green line. The Plymouth branch was between Plymouth branch, the Conshohocken, I should say, and Woodland, 9 miles. And that was basically to serve some limestone quarries, especially the Carson quarry in around Fort Washington. Port Kennedy branch, not a lot of traffic. It was only 1 mile long. And that went into the Valley Forge Park for an asbestos business. And that operated actually almost into Conrail. Stony Creek branch connected Norristown with Lansdale. So the locals that served that branch came out of Abrams Yard. The Norristown branch would be all the freight traffic in Norristown and down the line to East Falls. So the areas that would be in Manayunk, steel company. Yeah, there were steel companies on the north side of the river. And then industries, Micron and the paper mill down there. This is all, again, businesses that don't exist today. And then the main line, which would be staying on the south side of the river. That was mostly Allenwood Steel, huge, huge customer. And so the locals operated from Abrams Yard over these branches to serve many, many customers. Local freight train schedule picked the year of 1964. Each service had a nickname. The train called the Henderson would do the Chester Valley branch. When required was the call time on that. Norristown 1 would be the Stony Creek branch, daily except Saturday. Port Kennedy, that little 1 mile thing every day except Sundays. You got out of the yard at 11. Wissahickon served what was the old Philadelphia, Germantown, and Norristown, or the passenger side of the Reading from Norristown down to the Reading terminal, but they only went as far as Gladwin. The West Conshohocken, I'm sorry, that was the one that went to Gladwin. Plymouth Buck, that's the nickname they had for the train that ran over the Plymouth branch, over as far as Woodland in some days. The Wood Lane turnaround. Wood Lane was a big storage yard also, and that operated from Abrams to Wood Lane and Port Richmond. Doylestown, which would be out of Lansdale, and then the Chester Valley branch all the way out to Downingtown. So all these locals, for the most part, did operate every day. Symbol freights that worked Abrams in 1964, the eastbound trains, shown here at 83, that's an Allentown to Darby Creek train, a lot of cement traffic on that, and also traffic for the B&O at East Side Yard. AP 12, and these are the times the crew come on duty. That's what the 12 and the 3 and the 8 mean. Allentown to Port Richmond, Rutherford to Port Richmond, HP 8, NP Newbury Junction to Port Richmond. That's the long runner. That's the longest route from the Reading, 210 miles from Port Richmond to Newbury Junction at Williamsport. And then the RP 330 Reading to Port Richmond, that's basically a turn. A lot of traffic for West Falls and the local industries in that section of Philadelphia. Westbound, you had Port Richmond to Allentown, PA 7, PR 145, Port Richmond train, AJs were the merchandise trains. Chicago and St. Louis were the destinations for those. Of course, as well as Port Richmond to Rutherford. Interchange Cherry Run would be the Western Maryland B&O connection. And then the PN 930 would be up to interchange with the New York Central and the Erie-Lackawanna, or Erie, way back in the day, up at Williamsport. Now we'll look at some photographs of the time that the Reading operated the yard, and these are all photographs BC, which means before I had a camera. So the first couple of pictures you're going to see are pictures that I was able to get from our files at the Reading Railroad Heritage Museum. and or from the internet. So this is a westbound passenger train passing under the signal bridge, which had semaphores at that time. And there's one of the famous T1s, eastbound, under the big signal bridge at Abrams. I actually turned down a ride in one of these things right in the yard itself when I was a kid. I was like 5 years old, and that was like kind of scary. Abrams Yard, this is a publicity photo from the renting company where they refurbished the Schuylkill after World War II, and of course they built the last Pacifics of any railroad in the United States. And this is east of the signal bridge and the yard office. This is Port Kennedy. I show Port Kennedy because initially we lived across the river, literally. All I had to do was walk over the bridge to get to Port Kennedy. And so I spent a lot of time there, actually more time than I did at Abrams initially, because it was so close to home. And of course, that's all rearranged today. The Route 422 bypass carries traffic over the bridge. And the local bridge is still there, and that picture is still there, but it's not for vehicle traffic. It's mostly for hikers and bikers and whatnot. And if you stood on the bridge and looked toward Abrams Yard to the east, that's the view you would have. You could see the old telltales that would warn the brakemen if they're riding on top of a boxcar that the bridge is coming up, especially at night where they might not see it. They could feel those things, and you hit the deck if you feel that brushing your shoulders or your head. In the distance is the asbestos company that was down there for lots and lots of years. And then about 2 miles around the bend in the distance would be Abrams Yard. So this is one of the few places on the Reading there was a 4-track main line. Now, the issue with Port Kennedy is I had a camera that wouldn't stop at trains. Abrams, the trains were stopped. And so I could start my photography career, so to speak, at Abrams, where I couldn't at Port Kennedy because nothing stopped. This is a copy of one of our issues of the Reading Tech Society, which I did just for the yard at Abrams. And it was in the diesel era only, because that's when my pictures were taken. And it's a good issue to get a hold of. There are more in detail, lots of good maps and things in that issue. So Abrams Yard, 1952 was when I started taking pictures there. I bought a Brownie Holiday camera. I think it was $8. It only took 8 pictures. No rapid rewind lever. You turn this little dial. So obviously you didn't stop action. You didn't take trains that were in motion. You had to do it one at a time. You had to wait a week or two to get the film back. And being a kid, it was a lot cheaper to shoot black and white. The only time I bought color film was for the Boy Scout Jamboree in 1957, when Baltimore, Ohio diesels came through and passenger cars and sleepers and whatnot from all over the country. So because of that color, I sprung for 2 rolls of color film. There's the very first photograph I took. This is with that little Brownie Holiday camera at Abrams Yard, one of the RS3s. And my first cab ride was also Abrams Yard, number 510. It was interesting too, because even though things were loose in those days compared to today, I was still asked to cross over all those tracks and get on the side of the locomotive opposite the yard office. So the people in the office didn't see me get on or get off. And that was very helpful that the crew suggested that. And I was able to get more than one ride, actually. But that was basically just shunting cars, as Reading called them, back and forth and back and forth. But for a little kid, that was a real thrill. These are some other pictures I took with that little Brownie Holiday camera. And while the quality wasn't that great, because the lens was certainly not what lenses are today, thank goodness for Photoshop. So running it through Photoshop, I was able to sharpen the focus. I was able to handle the lighting on it and really produce a pretty good image. That's one of the last order of Baldwin AS16 road switchers. They came through with a high hood, which set them apart from the other Baldwin AS16s. And they also could MU with any other maker, where because of electrical MU, the earlier AS16s were pneumatic, and they wouldn't MU even with this. So that's a little history there. The FTs, it's making a set out. Some of the westbound trains made set outs. Most of them did not. The eastbound trains were the trains that set out cars. And this is a set that was built in 1945. And these are the first road diesels on the Reading Railroad. Another westbound train with the Alco FA, FA1. And again, the signal bridge makes a wonderful prop. You'll see that in lots and lots of pictures because it did make a really good prop. This is a pair of RS3s, and this is actually the train that would go out the Chester Valley branch. The Chester Valley branch, to access that, you had to back out of Abrams to be pointed the correct direction west toward Downingtown. So that was a reverse move of about 2 miles. What you're looking at there is a pair of RS3s, which really was the standard power until they were replaced by the SW1500s. Typical shot of the RS3s working the yard. Most of the switchers at Abrams Yard were Alco RS3s. Occasionally a GP7 was used, but the RS3 was number one. Picture a little bit earlier, that's the original yard office, which was demolished in 1964, and the new cinder block building was built down to the east just a little bit. And there's the road crossing, which went to nowhere really. There's nothing on the other side as far as houses or businesses or whatever. Pair of Jeeps on that train. And there you have a pair of AS-16s, the original AS-16s headed east. Notice RS3 scene. The Reading, they were RS1s, which was confusing until you learned that that was their own designation, not the Alco designation. As time went on and the RS3s were replaced, the SW1500s were the locomotive of choice for switching there. And occasionally, before the RS3s are all taken off the roster, they would MU together. This is an eastbound train with a Jeep leading to RS3s. And again, most every train stopped to either pick up or set out cars. The track that the GP7 is on, which is also the GP7 at our museum, number 621, leads back to what was that anthracite facility with the big coal piles, but became a small maintenance facility. So he's on that track. The RS3 is over on the middle, it's working in the yard. You can see the Reading coil cars there that had stainless steel coils in them. This is unusual. I'm not sure what the story was because they didn't need 5 RS3s on the main line. The main line had practically no grades. So I'm assuming that some of those were going back to Reading to have maintenance. So that's a very unusual picture. That's a sad picture. There's 3 out of service RS3s on their way to the scrapper. You can see the Reading is painted out and they're headed east, probably over to Naparano in northern Jersey. There you get a glimpse of the yard office to the right there, the modern building, which is still there. Occasionally, the one train every night came down from Reading, and if they were refurbishing electric multiple unit cars, they would tack them on the back of a freight train and take them down to Wayne Junction. So that's what you're looking at there. You can see the silver roof, fresh paint, and not unusual really to see that happen because the heavy repairs were done in Reading. The lighter repairs were done at the Wayne Electric Car Shop. Some interesting cargo. GP30, GP35 pair. And the Alcos, not just the Alcos, the EMDs also, but especially the Alcos, 5,400 horsepower seemed to suit all the needs of the trains on the main line. And so you would often see a combination of a 6-axle unit and a 4-axle unit. And again, that added up to 5,400 horsepower, which they considered ideal. So you're going to see a lot of pictures with a big guy and a little guy tied together. It's a westbound train. Another view of that combination. This time the little 424 is leading. And this is an eastbound train about to make a set out. A lot more power on that one. Looks like a solid coal train. There's 5308, which is also preserved at the Reading Railroad Heritage Museum. Again, working the yard, making a set out. You're looking east. There's the combination again, 6-axle, 4-axle. Train having set out some cars eastbound. Alco Century 630, the second order of those with the high-ad trucks. And this is probably the Plymouth Buck train that went over toward the Woodland and served a lot of industries on that line. Again, we have an Alco and EMD GP35 paired. That one is definitely the Plymouth Buck, running long and front. So he would cross the river at Bridgeport to Norristown and then go down the line almost to Conshohocken, and then pretty much where the Blue Route Bridge is today would swing over toward Orland. Pair of Century 424s heading to the engine terminal, which is just west of the yard office. 5210 was the highest number, Century 424. 5300 was the lowest number, Century 630. On a beautiful October day. And there they are under the big signal bridge. And I found that interesting. The Century 424s were ordered when the number boards in the back of the unit protruded. The 5300 was ordered once the Alco changed the design to the recessed angled number boards. Westbound, Century 424 and one of the newer GP39-2s, 3412, also happens to be preserved at the Reading Railroad Heritage Museum. Now, this is a friend of mine took a picture of me taking a picture. So I call that my photography technique. Of course, back in those days, you were walking on lots and lots of oil. Today, you won't find that at engine terminals. It's a different world. And there's the result. And again, 3412, we're happy to say is in our collection. The engine facility was also a great place to take pictures. Nobody bothered you. And the light was good a lot of the day. And again, this replaced the roundhouse at Bridgeport in 1964. It's a metal fabricated building. 3413, interesting combination there. The switcher was probably being taken to Reading for maintenance, but I'm not 100% sure of that. There you have a pair of the GP39-2s. They bought 20 of those, and they were the newest power on the Reading when the Reading went into Conrail. Now, one of the things I loved about Abrams, especially as a kid, and my parents would take me there, you knew when a train was coming when the signal lights changed. Usually they were always red, but when they changed to yellow or changed to green, and of course green told you that it was just going to go right on through. The yellow was to slow down and stop. But notice how even without fog, the light glows out from the signal itself. And it was just, as I said, a little kid, not understanding a whole lot yet, it was magic to see those things change colors. Red of the Jeeps with one of the green and yellow cabooses. And there you have a pair of GP7s. And there's the 621 again. And of course, second generation power came along. So you had first generation and second generation diesels mixed occasionally. That's the class unit, number 600, GP7, eastbound train. And there's one of the times that a GP7 was used to switch the yard. It was a flat yard. There was no hump, which didn't prevent them from goosing it up, and the brakeman would cut off and let the couplers open, and the cars would drift to whichever track they were going on. It's also magical at night. I don't have any photographs, but every one of those ladder tracks had a kerosene switch lantern. And of course, then at night, you saw the colors from the switch lanterns, which also was very magical. Wintertime, Jeep again working in the yard. And there you have a pair of Jeeps westbound. One of the GP7s that was painted into the green and yellow, the scheme that has the yellow going all the way down to the walkboard. Not the walkboard, to the frame, I should say, or some of it had a higher green. 607 again on a different day, setting out cars. Good place to watch trains in the winter because you could stay in the car until the train came. There had been a caboose track on the other side of the signal bridge for a while, but that didn't last a whole long time. And again, the signal bridge made a wonderful, wonderful prop. Combination of first generation, second generation EMDs, and a GP35, GP30 combination, again, making a set out. Pair of GP30s. Reading, of course, was the first railroad in the United States to get the GP30 when it was produced in 1962. So the very first one is very significant, the 5513. There's the yard office, again, the newer one, which is still there today, still used by Norfolk Southern. Westbound train. And there's that 4-axle, 6-axle combination I mentioned earlier. GP30, Century 630, westbound. The engine terminal, a mix of GP30s, GP35s. They did light servicing here. Any heavy maintenance had to be done out at Reading. Westbound train, 3620, the first of the GP35s, the 6501 when it was delivered. Coal train. It would have been bituminous in those days, more than likely, off the Western Maryland. It's always nice when there's a lot of Reading cars in the consist. You can see at this time the SW1500s had taken over the local switching. There is 2 yards. They called this the seaboard yard on this side. Not nearly as large as the other yard behind me here, but it was still serviceable. And I'm trying to think of which one of the crates would have been used for that. Nice winter scene. Westbound. And another westbound. GP35s were the most common of the second generation power, 4-axle power. And that's going back into the engine facility. Another SW100, 1500 here. Again, more than likely going to Reading for maintenance. Here we have 2 eastbound trains making a set out at the same time. So sometimes you really got lucky, and there was a lot of action at the same time. These 7600s were 3600 horsepower, SD45s, and they were the biggest as far as horsepower on the Reading. And if you look closely, you can see the build-out windshield. Because they had dual controls, they had the windshield was built out 11 inches to allow for access, easy access around the double controls. Another pair, in this case, of SD45s and the GP35, eastbound. And there's one of the five, excuse me, US U-30Cs, again, making a set out. Pretty heavy powered train there, the GP30s, SSD-45, excuse me, U-30C. And I love that picture. It's on the back of my first diesel book. There's a father pointing out to his young boy the train, maybe explaining what it was or whatever, but it kind of reminded me of what my parents did way, way, way back. SW-1500, this is the first batch for those regular switcher trucks. 2750 series. And then the second group that they bought had the flexicoil trucks, they called them. These could be used in road service. You could go faster with that truck design than you could with the yard switcher truck design. They were the 2760s. 10 of each, 10 of each. One of the SW-1500s, the second batch, was destroyed at Port Richmond when a runaway grain hopper smashed into it. And the crew saw it coming, so they got off. Nobody was hurt, but there's interesting pictures of that, which I have in another show. And because of that, it was the only SW-1500 to be painted into the newer green paint scheme. So that would explain that. And this is a job for the Plymouth Buck. He's heading over toward Norristown and over toward Woodland to work that branch. One of the earlier SW-1500s. And they had a couple of MP-15s, 10 of those. And you see the trucks on that's a road switcher type of truck. And these were the last of that group. And they were actually bought as road engines rather than switchers. So here he is with a relief train, one of the Reading hooks. And of course, fuel to supply that. This is back at that engine facility that they built in 1964. And I love that because everything in the picture is Reading, even the boxcar behind the locomotive. Passenger trains, the push-pull came through. Locomotive on each end. This is train 7 from Philadelphia to Reading every afternoon. And of course, by that time, the sun was in a good position to photograph it. That lasted until 1981 under SEPTA. Most of the trains in this era were RDC cars. So here you see 3 of those going west, come out of the Reading terminal, cross the river at Norristown, and then go west on the main line. Eastbound RDCs. Occasionally, and not very often, but occasionally you would get foreign power. So here's a pair of 3 actually, GP7s from the Baltimore and Ohio, eastbound. And this is a treat. For a couple of months, Reading was power short in 1974, and they leased the FAs from the Western Maryland Railroad. So this is an eastbound train. You've got a G7 leading the 2 Alcos, and they're going to make a set out, which let the unobstructed view with the FA. These are FA2s. The horns were fantastic. You can see 2 clusters of multi-chime horns. So that was something I actually bumped into by accident. We didn't have a network that we have today with the internet and all that to find out what's coming. It's different. This is they operated steam trips in the 70s, 72. This would have been high iron tours. There's the engine facility I've been talking about. So the 2102 provided the power for those trips. They went to Harrisburg and turned there. And there's one of the newer cabooses, the extended vision caboose of the Reading. And with the caboose, that's the end of the train and the end of the Reading. So Conrail, 1976 to 1999. You're going to see a number of pictures at the beginning of this segment that have a combination of paint schemes, the blue Conrail and some with the green and yellow of the Reading. That's a former Reading caboose. It was modernized. And a lot of the locomotives simply received a different number, which meant painting out the Reading diamond and putting a CR and whatever the new number was. And here you have a pair of GEs heading west as the switchers work in the yard. One of the GP30s, renumbered, still in green and yellow, with a Penn Central SD45 westbound. And 3 4-axle, no, the first one was a 6-axle, yeah. 2 of the 3 are 4-axles heading east. It was different for a while. As much as I hated to see the Reading go, at least there was different paint schemes to shoot, and of course different locomotive models that didn't exist on the Reading. But the crane still stayed in green and yellow for quite a while. And there you can see the 2773 still in its green. And you got a mishmash there. You got Reading Power that hasn't been touched yet. The Conrail Penn Central unit. Oh, by the way, that was my chase car. I should have pointed that out. The little yellow Volkswagen Beetle. We were fortunate because they started run-through service. They gave D&H access to Potomac Yard to supposedly provide competition for Conrail. It was kind of a joke, but it was interesting to watch. So here's a pair of U-30Cs, Delaware and Hudson, going through Abrams Yard. I like the picture because it has a Reading maintenance truck, so you know that's Reading, and yet it's D&H as far as the locomotives are concerned. This is a daily train, NE87, southbound from Portland, Maine, to basically Washington, D.C., and NE84 was the counterpart, northbound. You see a mix of power here, Alco Century 420, GE23B, and there's the GE39. Notice the caboose. They realized the train had to reverse at Allentown. And it took a long, long time to move the caboose from one end of the train to the other. So what they started to do was to put 2 cabooses on the train, one at one end and one at the other. So when they went into Allentown, all they did was run the engines around and didn't have to mess with the caboose. This is the Freedom train. Went through Abrams, going from Bethlehem to West Trenton. And this is an early morning, I think 6:30 in the morning shot. And like a dummy, I didn't take a tripod. But what I did do was to lean the camera on the roof of my Volkswagen and use that as a tripod. So the pictures came out fairly well. This is an excursion from Reading to Norristown and back, celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Reading with 2102. 2102 has had many, many excursions over its lifetime. Another scene with Penn Central, one of the big 6-axle Centuries. Well, too many of those came through here because most of those were sent out to iron ore trains at Mingo Junction, Ohio. This is a real mishmash of locomotives. Some with full Reading paint yet, others with different variations of Conrail. Sometimes the Reading was painted out in green, sometimes it was painted out in black. None of it was attractive. And that's what they call a dog's breakfast. And eventually everything became blue. There you have one of the Jeeps with 2 of the rebuilt Alco RSs. They were rebuilt with EMD engines. And what they did was to take the engines from E8s that were retired. E8s all had 2 engines in them. And so they used those to rebuild those, what were Alcos. Here you have real combination 2s. It's still in red and green. And interestingly, you know, Conrail, well, you know, Conrail. They closed the yard twice and then found out that it didn't work. They had to reopen it. They used, I think it was the first time they serviced everything out of Philadelphia when they closed Abrams. The other time they tried it out of Morrisville, and both of those were failures. So for a couple months it happened. And then they went back to running trains out of Abrams and, going back to the old way it was done. Again, a real mishmash of power here. And interestingly, for a while, they leased some Bangor to Rustic locomotives. Here's a set that has come out of the engine terminal, GP38 from the Bangor and Rustic. See, the bell is mounted right in front of the windshield. Now, these are those rebuilt RS3s that I mentioned. The stacks are from the EMD engine, so they have 2 stacks instead of 1 that the Alcos had. And for me, growing up with the RS3s for so many years, it was weird to hear these things wind up because I'm expecting the Alco sound and I'm getting the EMD sound. It was like a real dissonance. Westbound train, this is a train that ran from Potomac Yard up to Portland, Maine again. And the power had run through power from the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac. But they always had a Penn Central leader for signals and activation that these units didn't have. 4 Jeeps heading east out of the yard. And a pair of GEs going west. The GP20, which they had, I think, only 10 on the whole roster. And we started to get some color with the railroads that became part of Conrail, former Erie-Lackawanna, GP35 leading an eastbound train, ex-Central Jersey leading a westbound train. And there you have Erie-Lackawanna, again, 2nd unit, Penn Central 1st unit, with a Reading and full Reading paint. And this was interesting. This was a 72 car freight train with one ex-Lehigh Valley GP38. Still looking pretty Lehigh Valley, except that the CR has been put where the flag was. RDCs were still being used at this point, owned by SEPTA and operated by SEPTA. And again, things became blue. Not nearly as much fun as it was with the Reading. Unfortunately, Conrail took the signal bridge down in 1983, and so you lost a huge prop. I really missed that for taking pictures, but what are you going to do? Former Reading SW1001, you see the drip strip right there? That was a really good snow. I think it's like an 18-inch snowfall. The flanger out. One of the GE Camels, they call them C39-8s. You can see these stacks in the background. That's the former Philadelphia Electric Barbados Island power station, just in the river at Norristown. Then, of course, you get into the wide cab era. And these guys lasted a long time, even into black NS paint, the SW1001s, and there's still 1 or 2 of those, I think, still in service. So we get to Norfolk Southern, the last of the operators that operated and still operates the yard. That's the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus, going to Hershey from West Trenton. Always a fascinating train. And with Norfolk Southern came more run-through power. So occasionally you would see Union Pacific engines, which is what you're looking at there. There's the yard office in the distance. And even Mexican units, Ferromex. Run through, usually the oil trains had BNSF power or Union Pacific power because they came from North and South Dakota. And what has made it a lot more fun for me is the whole heritage unit program of Norfolk Southern. And I've managed to catch 18 out of the 20 units at Abrams. You see the Savannah, Atlanta, New York Central, Reading, Erie, Virginian, Erie-Lackawanna, Penn Central, Illinois Terminal, C&J, Wabash, Monongahela, Conrail, Norfolk Southern, Nickel Plate, Central Georgia, original Norfolk Southern, Interstate, Lehigh Valley, Norfolk Western, and the Pennsy. And that's the first one I caught at Abrams. See how clean it is. This is brand new in 2012. And this is, again, one of those oil trains. Savannah and Atlanta, westbound, that would be a general freight. Eastbound, this is a stack train. See a lot of stack trains through Abrams now over to Morrisville. They're always over on the far side, so they don't have to cross over at what used to be Norris Tower to go over the bridge to Norristown and then down 1 mile to connect with the Trenton Cutoff for the Pennsy to get over to Morrisville. Illinois Terminal, one of my favorites. They call that one the glowworm. And of course, that's got to be a favorite. There's the old engine facility used for maintenance of machinery at this point. But whoever thought they'd see that? Pennsy. Nice paint scheme also. Both directions. This is a train that used to come out of Morrisville every afternoon, and they discontinued that. Jersey Central, nice looking unit eastbound. Again, a stack train. And westbound. Another favorite paint scheme. There's the Erie, westbound. Lackawanna. Erie, Lackawanna. Delaware, Lackawanna, I'm sorry. There's the interstate. They call that the creamsicle. Crappy weather, but it still looks good. Monongahela. On an extremely windy day, you see the flag, it really hurt. Here's the original Norfolk Southern, very small railroad, but a great, great paint scheme. Norfolk and Western, westbound with the UP second unit. The Wabash, excuse me, Norfolk and Western on this one. There's the Virginian, another good paint scheme. They call this the Bumblebee. And the Reading, the Queen Bee. Central Georgia, eastbound train. This is a train that's going to Camden. This is, they have a couple of engines they painted when they celebrated AC/DC conversions. And they painted 2 of them blue, and then the others have black cabs, but silver bodies. There's the Conrail. Again, intermodal train for Morrisville. The Reading again, westbound. Again, the Conrail this time westbound. Lehigh Valley, always a nice paint scheme. There's the creamsicle again. Original Norfolk Southern. And the end of the show.